Okay, everybody, welcome. Joe Bergamini here, Sabian Education Network. Good afternoon. I'm really happy today to have Mr. Adam Gust with us. Adam, welcome.
Hey, thank you.
Adam's in Los Angeles. He's a professional drummer. We were just talking about some playing he did at Disneyland, but he's got a long resume of live and session playing. And we met, and he has developed expertise by using and researching some approaches to the central nervous system and something he calls the somatic drummer that has helped him address some issues he was having in his career that I think a lot of us experience with, maybe tension and different things. So we're calling this the science of the groove. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about the science-based knowledge of the nervous system that Adam has researched and brought to bear now. He's also a drum teacher, and we were just talking about he has a passion for really wanting to share this information with drummers and us teachers. So please welcome Adam, and I'm going to give him the floor. I will watch the chat. I might disappear so you guys don't have to look at my slack-jawed gaze all day while he's speaking, and then I'll pop back in. So please feel free to type your questions into the chat. And with that, Adam, welcome, and we're honored to have you.
Oh, thank you, Joe. Yeah, great to be here with you all. And really nice to see you, Michael Lear. He definitely understands what I'll be talking about, sort of this bottom-up approach to drumming, like really looking at the nervous system, how it affects the brain, because I feel like a lot of drum education is kind of top down. It's focused on brain activity, cognition, and how it affects the body. But a lot of recent nervous system science is showing there's this kind of flipped script on how we think about feeling. So I'd like to dive into this right away by talking about the vagus nerve. We got a few people on camera. Is there anyone who's heard of the vagus nerve? Oh, wow, we do. Okay, great. Cool. Wow. Awesome. Drummers into this. Okay, cool. Because the vagus nerve is really important for drummers because it influences our perception of time. It affects our heart rate, and it also impacts our access to fine motor skills, like finger control is definitely affected by what state our vagus nerve is in, and even like four-way coordination, and our access to our metabolic resources and endurance it affects, and also learning and hearing and speech and facial expression. The vagus nerve is really the interface between the brain and how we play drums, between intention and action. That's what I like to think of it as. It sort of mitigates like this flow of the motor nerves to the sensory nerves, and the state that the vagus nerve is in affects how we play. And I don't hear a lot of drummers talking about it. It's great to see some hands up. At least people know what it is, because it's not an overstatement to talk about the vagus nerve this way. So in 2017, when I found out what it is and what it does, it changed the course of my life. And I dedicated my time and really kind of my life's work to the clinical application of nervous system science to drumming. And this year, I was invited to do a TED Talk about the work that I was doing, and it was listed on TED.com, and it was the first talk about the vagus nerve. I was pretty shocked. I'm like, a drummer is the first person to talk about a kind of groundbreaking nervous system science. But, I'm proud of that, but it was also a little surprising and just like showed me how little understanding there is about how this science is slowly matriculating into kind of interdisciplinary innovation. So, TED is a huge international resource for new ideas. And so I was really proud to be able to do that. And thank you, Joe, for checking out the talk and inviting me to talk more about this application to drums. And so cool to see people coming in. Oh, man. Yeah, this has been crazy because I've been doing all this work in this 12 by 12 shed by myself, doing all these classes online with people with PhDs in therapy and neuroscience and physiology. And I'm always felt like the idiot in the room, just trying to keep up. But I mean, after years of doing this now, I feel like, wow, okay, I feel like I've developed something special. And when SEN was talking about injury prevention in drum education, I felt like, whoa, okay, I have a voice in this conversation. So why haven't we heard about the vagus nerve? Well, it's because it's relatively new and it's taken a long time for the research to even find its way into different communities. And there were two big developments in the 90s that initiated this nuanced research about the nervous system that changed how we see things. So there was the fMRI machine. It's the functional magnetic resonance imaging. And what that does is it shows a movie of this interaction between the body and the brain in terms of neural transmissions. And so we were able to watch the movie instead of just a snapshot that we had before. And so scientists and researchers were basing our understanding of the nervous system and the brain activity on this snapshot. And so when we were able to see the movie, suddenly we saw, we see the full story. We get to see kind of the plot lines and how things developed the way they did. It was kind of like somebody just saw a freeze frame of Star Wars and it happened to be Chewbacca. They'd be like, oh, Chewbacca's the main character in Star Wars. And they base their whole impression of the movie on that. And then when they see the movie, they're like, oh, wow, what happened? Okay, it's not the main character at all. It was an incomplete story. And the same thing happened with our biometrics, studying of, endocrinology and like understanding heart rate variability and blood oxygen and particularly our stress hormones. So we used to have to be able to take a blood sample and it would get tested in the lab and we'd get the results day later. And so, but it would be just a snapshot of when that sample was taken. But now we're able to do the whole story. We're able to have the movie of up to date, up to millisecond by millisecond, how our body chemistry is changing. And so this movie of our biometrics along with our neural transmissions in brain and body have given this new interpretation of the autonomic nervous system. How our body responds to stress in particular is what I'm interested in. And so this has led from research to theory and into practice in different disciplines. And I am super fascinated with bringing it into drumming. And thank you all for showing up to check it out with me. I appreciate it. So there have been a few barriers. When I talk too much about the science and it gets too technical, I kind of lose people, and then I try to simplify it and I bring it back and kind of make it more accessible, and then it doesn't make sense. And so there's kind of this fine line in between the science and the kind of woo-woo aspect of this spiritual mind-body connection that I'm trying to ride. And there's also this cultural bias that's an issue. And so this is really flipping the script on how we think about feeling. And I feel like drummers is a good kind of cross section to talk about this, because when's the last time anyone ever turned to you and was like, man, you sound great. You have a great thought. You would never hear that. You would say, you have a great feel. We're just so even ingrained in our vernacular is this idea that feeling is the foundation of what we do. But as I explored our educational kind of paradigms and how we teach drumming, this isn't necessarily the focus. There's this cognitive bias that exists in some of our drumming systems. And so I wanted to suss this out with you. I could talk all day about this. I've probably talked long enough before getting to the feeling of it, but there's an experiential exercise I'd like to conduct with anyone who wants to follow along. So put your first fingers up. These are the dashboard drummer fingers. And so I hold these up and now switch to fives in each hand. Good. Yeah, this is a unison. This is bilateral. So our brain is sending motor messages to our hands and we're getting sensation messages back that are moving the fingers. So now go back to ones and then back to fives. Cool. Now put a one in the right hand and a five in the left. Now switch for that so that the five and the one is in the other hand. Cool? You notice that's a little harder, right? So foundationally, the body wants to first learn in unison bilaterally, and then this is contralateral. It's sort of a foundational principle of the nervous system. That's how our body likes to learn, and it harmonizes both hemispheres of the brain. All right, it's going to get a little more challenging, this challenge stage. We're going to go twos in each hand, or a peace sign. And now go to threes in each hand, which is A-OK. Cool. And now I'm going to add a little nuanced detail to this. When you switch back and forth, make sure that this middle finger stays upright. That's going to be a little finger control exercise. It's okay if you flip me off. I've been divorced. I've been through worse. So when you switch back and forth, try to make sure that when you go, that middle finger stays upright. Yeah. Good. So this is like a little middle layer. There's first we would do bilateral unison, and then we kind of suss out details about it, and we try to self-correct and make it more smooth. And this is kind of processing this neural transmission back and forth to the hands. And we're training ourselves to be in unison. Now here comes the trick. 3 in one hand and 2 in the other. Uh-oh. Now switch back and forth and keep that middle finger up. It's challenging, right? So what's your feel? Oh man, y'all are doing it. Dang, y'all are drummers.
Yeah, this is one of those things that's making me say to myself, how did I learn how to play the drums?
Man, well, you know what? The ultimate goal of this is just to understand this foundational aspect of the nervous system is we want to imprint what we learn physically bilaterally in unison first, nuance it, suss out the details in both hands, and then switch to contralateral. And so this is individuating the finger control, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you play drums well or not. This is just, the purpose of the exercise is just to give you this impression, like just ground zero, nervous system foundation, bottom up understanding is that unison, both sides first, and then contralateral. So, okay, what's the point of that? Well, I'd like to apply this to how we teach drums. So, cognitive bias exists in a lot of systems, and there's a lot of research showing that cognitive bias systems lead to dysregulation in the nervous system. And so if this exists in drumming, we definitely need to suss this out. So let's see if this bilateral unison exists in our drumming systems as a foundational way to learn drumming. So if you let's think of our 40 rudiments. I'd like somebody to put in the chat your favorite rudiment that has a bilateral unison in it. We can wait all day because there are no unisons in our rudiments. And so when I noticed this, I was kind of like, wait, okay, this is a cognitive bias system. It's not really following this foundational principle of how our nervous system works, which is fine. There's this scientific technical side of it. And when it gets too much, we have to have this full story. We don't just want the snapshot of how we learn drumming. We want the full story. We also want the more expansive felt sense of how our body learns. And so I feel like this is an example of how there's a cognitive bias system in our drum education that we all are using, which is great. I love rudiments. I'm glad I have cognition. Having a brain's great. But I also feel like there's this part of drumming and teaching it. I feel like it's absent in our drumming systems. So, does this matter? I don't know. I've had folks recommend to me, rudiments have been around forever. It's perfectly fine not to have this felt sense about them. And, rudiments have worked great for years. We've had so many great drummers. Well, let's kind of check and see if there's any dysregulation in our body based on learning rudiments, because that's kind of this typical thing that happens with cognitively biased systems. So if anyone has sticks and a pad, you can play unisons along with me. It's going to keep it really simple. This is going to be just unisons in each hand. All right, cool. Dig it. So now I really want you to even visualize the neural transmission from the brain to the hand, and then the sensory transmission coming back to the brain in each hand, and that's going to each hemisphere in the brain, and you're also hearing the sound of the stick hitting the pad. And so there's a lot of sensory information going on in here, and if we can align the sound of the stick hitting the pad with the sensation of this feedback loop going on in motor and sensory nerves in each hand, we really start to, this unison ends up making our instrument part of us. We end up completing the sensation circuit from one hand to the other through the instrument. In this case, it's just the pad for now. But the ultimate goal, I feel, is to embody our instrument. And so just unisons is a great way to do that, to really feel what that sound and sensation is like. Okay, now let's do a full stroke, and now let's drop the left hand to a tap and keep it a unison. Cool. And now we're going to switch to the full stroke in the left and the tap in the right. 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. Great. We're just playing unisons. Bilateral, this is sort of that nuanced piece of keeping the middle finger up. And now we're going to nuance this even more by alternating the accent from hand to hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. Really focus on that being a unison, even though the distance is different. Now double time it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Really focus on this unison from hand to hand associating with the sound of the unison in each hand. We're going to stop, 2, 3, 4, go. So, how'd that go? I've showed this to a lot of great drummers, and a lot of them are like, what the hell's happening? Like, I can't play a unison. Like, I'm so used to playing flam taps that I'm flamming. I'm not actually playing a unison. That may or may not have happened to you, but I feel like this is an evidence of how we're baking in this dysregulation, this flamming into our bodies by this system of drumming that, again, I love rudiments. I practice them all the time, but I feel like there's this also kind of equal and opposite sense of approaching the foundations of how the nervous system learned that we learned from our hand exercise. So I feel like, well, how do we do this? How do we have a kind of more somatic version of this cognitively biased system? That's what I'm going to call it. You may feel differently, but just kind of humor me for now. And because I'm going to suggest that we play unisons through all of our 40 rudiments. Because I've like when I hear Steve Gadd play, and I've listened to him, and when he plays a unison, it's an orchestration. You know, it's like, okay, he is hearing that as these two sounds becoming one. And kick, snare, two toms, snare and tom, whatever it is, like he's really in tune to the dynamic contrast between those two things and those two things hitting at exactly the right time. And I think that's part of his sound, is that he has that very deep attention to unison. And I don't think it comes, even though he's a rudimental drummer, I think he has this felt sense of how to bring that out in his instruments. So let's just try some rudiments like alternating sticking with unisons. So 1, 2, 3, that's going to be an accent pattern. And then doubles would be right, right, left, left, right, right, left, left. And really focusing on that being a unison. And a paradiddle, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left. And having the same sensitivity to it in our sensory nerves that we would have if we were just playing regular unisons. So double paradiddle, right, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, right, left, left, right. So, you know, how does this work out on the drums? How, you know, on one surface, it's one thing. But let's kind of mess around with it on the drums, and we kind of, maintaining this unison. I'm going to bring the sound down. You know, not so hard, but it's kind of, we start to feel how this, you know, really piquing our curiosity and intention to play unisons can give us some things that we haven't played before. I noticed before I was working on this, if I'd try to play a beat like that, it would kind of be, you know, it sounds sloppy. But there's kind of, it adds this extra layer, like I know like the producer would say, give me something different in the bridge, you know, and I'd be like, I don't know what. And so I would just like, even just unisons between like hi-hat and ride, or like both hands on hi-hat, or floor, like it just adds this extra little nuance that even you, like the producer or the people in the band might not necessarily know what's happening, but they recognize that there was a shift. And in terms of teaching students, I feel like unisons around the drums is a great way to check our timing, because I like this analogy, like imagine if each limb was a singer. And so, okay, we got 4 singers, and they all want to sing 4-part harmony. Okay, let's start with a tuning note, and then we have them all sing. It's like, whoa, wait, where's the unison? Like, no, it'll be fine. We're gonna sing in 4-part harmony. It'll be good. You know, it's like, no, you're not. You can't sing a unison together. You're not going to be able to sing 4-part harmony. But I feel like in drumming, we feel like, okay, we can flam a little bit, but I still want to bury the click. And it's like, there's no way you're going to bury a click if you can't bury the unisons. Because as we move around the drums, we're going to have to be able to change the distance of our stick height in order to keep these unisons. And so there's this exercise, rather than starting with the typical rock beat, there's something there's something that I like students to kind of understand how these moving around the drum set affects your timing, even if you're playing the same static thing. So like that left hand to snare from the hi-hat, that's a little bit of a move. Okay, and if we're flamming, or if that's uncomfortable, or if we shank it, okay, we need to explore that movement. And the unison really brings out these nuances in our movements that can keep us in time. And we don't even necessarily need a click, because we can just really hone in on this, completing the sensation circuit through the instrument in our unisons. And so then when we shift the unison to contralateral, then we can come up with some really cool ideas, and we can stay in time. So an example of that is simple again, but you'll get the picture. Oh, I'm fired. Outside of dropping the stick, that was depicting how, if we can make sure that our unisons are tight when we switch to contralateral, we've already kind of mapped out the movement around the drums, and we know that that's going to work for us. So another way to practice rudiments is just kind of, I call it smacking the butt, like hitting the butt of the stick in our hand, and we can feel unisons that way. You don't even need a drum. And if that's not landing together, we need to kind of suss out why that is. You know, how feeling the sensation circuit, the audio sense of it, and how it feels in the hand. And then you can play all your rudiments that way. This is an idea, and this kind of brings it more into the feeling idea, because when the stick hits the palm of your hand, when you go to the drum set, that can be like a sound. Like in the hand, it's like that. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so you can do your unison paradiddles that way. Now try this out and see if you don't notice your time getting better. See if you don't notice, suddenly I also notice I hear music better, because when my unisons are tighter, that means there's less clutter. Like I think about one of my favorite bass players to play with, Tim LaFave. Like when he changes notes, it's a unison in each hand, you know? Like it's within a millisecond when he goes from one note to the next. And I feel like if I'm not that equally sensitive to my level of nuanced unison, I'm going to kind of clutter up the groove for somebody like that. But then, of course, we played with guitar players and bass players whose unison between their hands is a little more sloppy, like 5 to 10 milliseconds. And, you know, we might not necessarily want to play with them, but we want to match our level of nuanced unison to the level of player that we want to play with. And so like really focusing on these unisons helps us when we move away from unison to cross lateral. So this is, I feel like this, okay, we're moving right along here. Do we have any questions in the chat yet, Joe?
No, not in the chat, but I want to ask you something.
Oh yeah, please.
So actually, just 2 weeks ago, I was teaching the molar technique to a student, and I'm not sure if I have my sound on. I might. Is it going to mute if I play?
I hear you.
So like the way in It's Your Move, the way the molar technique is taught. Dom has like a pumping motion thing where you go left, right, and then you go right, and then you go together. And my student was. I'd observed this so many times with myself, but my student came back and said, why is it that I can go faster together and when my left is alone, I can't go as fast? Like the left is modeling the right almost. Is that like a demonstration of what you're saying, kind of?
Yeah. That's this foundational principle of how our body learns. And the other part of that is that we all have some dysregulation built into our body. I suggested some of it comes from rudiments. Other parts of it just comes from being alive and having this stress imprint itself. Our biography on our biology is a huge factor in this. And drumming is an unbelievable way to suss this out. So if we're having some inconsistency in the hands, maybe we need to figure out, there's something that either needs to be strengthened or relaxed in order to push the tempo or relax it. And so it gets, our nervous system is a recording device. I mean, there is long-term memory in our nervous system. We probably heard the term muscle memory before. There's procedural memory or implicit memory. And so drumming is a wonderful way to sort of figure out how to get more centered, how to have both sides of our body work together. Because if there is some tension on one side, there's always some contralateral compensation. So any fix that we get that on one side, we've already doubled our benefit. So, I mean, sussing out this asymmetry, little tiny improvements are already improved on both sides. Because, I remember my dad had this knee injury in high school with football, and he was having back problems, and the doctor saw his back, and he's like, oh, did you hurt your knee in high school? And he could tell because of the way his back had compensated for this injury. And then it's so whatever we have that's asymmetrical, sussing that out and improving it has already doubled our benefits. And so that's another cool thing about unison, is it really hones in on ways to find these asymmetries and help correct them. I see Michael Lear nodding. His Yoga for Drummers program definitely helps people find out where their asymmetries are. And it's funny, as we're expanding our infinity of movement when you find don't have as much movement this way, I have more this way. Even though we're having tiny movements with our hands, these, even when the movement is bigger, it's affecting the smaller movements because of this asymmetry. So this is a good way to get into this next element, because I did bring up the vagus nerve earlier. So I'm kind of laying this foundation of how our nervous system works. So apply this to the feet. Yeah, I'm getting to that. Let's see, somatic bank account coming up in about 15 minutes, Anthony. Thank you. Hopefully we've all heard this idea of the lizard brain. So it's because I'm going to be talking about the body, but we're all kind of tend to be socialized into being brain oriented. And so if we understand what the lizard brain is, it helps to get in to find out what the lizard body is. So if you haven't heard of what the lizard brain is, it's kind of a colloquialism for neuroscience that when we go into a stress response, we reduce our capacity in our brain down to our limbic and kind of autonomic brain. And we lose access to really the human part of our brain, which is the neocortex. And so that's been called the lizard brain because lizards don't have a neocortex. And so this is such a great way to talk about the vagus nerve, because the vagus is very much influencing our autonomic state, our stress response, autonomic being automatic, non-conscious. And so there are these non-conscious factors going on that can reduce our access to our neocortex. And so drumming is a great way of making sure that we have access to these parts of our brain, because there are things that we need to perform on the drums that we can only do with our neocortex. And so if we can work with that and know what we have access to, we can start to find out when we are regulating and when we're not. So imagine if a grenade goes off next to you, boom, it goes off. What's going to happen? Your shoulders are going to go off, your head's going to go forward, and not to kill you, just to scare you, far enough away that it's just a fear factor. And so the pieces of the expression on your face is going to pull towards the nose. And so these are all inclinations that are found in fight or flight. Head moving forward, shoulders coming up, and facial expression pulling towards the nose. And so I like to suss these things out in drumming. I love this. Like, this is just a neck brace that you get on Amazon for $12. And so I'll practice things and I'll put it on and I'll like kind of pulse my head against the back of the brace. And anything that comes up when I'm practicing, anything that pulls me out of feeling the brace on the back of my neck, that means that my head came forward. It's kind of like the movie. It's kind of the complete story. I know that whatever I did on the drums at that moment that made me pull my head forward, oh, that's an indication of a stress response. And shoulders coming up, I also have a shoulder brace I use, and facial expression pulling towards the nose. I put tape, myotape on my face so that I can detect these micro movements in the mouth and I can keep my mouth closed so I'm always nasal breathing. I'm trying to move ahead, trying to get to the feet for you, Anthony. So this affects our perception of time, because when we go into fight or flight, we detect whether there's threat in our environment or not. Our body is detecting threat, and it goes into like the Matrix, like, you know, Men in Black guy shoots a bullet, everything slows down. I have to make the perfect movement to avoid being killed in the next split second. And so your internal perception of time slows down, but externally your performance increases. And so we need to be really careful, like at what level, what range of fight or flight we're going into, because it affects our overall concept of time. And so another concept of this lizard brain is there's a deeper piece to the vagus nerve work that I talked about with Rich Stitzel on his podcast, The Drum Mantra, and talking about how the evolution of over the last 800 million years is still inside of us, which sounds a little woo-woo, but there's an example of it that I think kind of that exemplifies it. If you hold your arm out this way and do this ball and socket joint movement, you are using a part of your brain that existed in fish, because fish fins, this is all the movement they had to do. Now, if you move the elbow, you're moving a part of the brain that existed in reptiles. And so if you move the wrist, you're moving a ball and socket joint that existed in mammals. And now if you're moving the fingers, now we're in the neocortex. There's a somatomotor cortex that controls this individuation of the fingers, our in-hand coordination. And when we're doing finger control, we have to have access to our somatomotor cortex. And so so what happened with humans? We developed tools, and this is a tool. We love these tools. So this fingertip sensitivity that allows us access to manipulate tools is a very human thing. And so a way to know that we are in our human brain is, do we have access to finger control? And so there's an exercise I like to think of. I call it the globe exercise, where we all kind of know what German grip is, and American and French. And so these are all specific points on the map. And this is, again, kind of a cognitive bias, like reducing things, being very technical and reductive. But I like to kind of bring it back around into the body and be more expansive. Imagine a globe being cut in half to two hemispheres. So you have two hemispheres here, and around the right hand is in one of the hemispheres. Imagine like you're pushing your hand up against a wall, and now move the stick this way. And this is one of the longitude lines. And so now follow all the longitude lines of the globe. Like, imagine like these tiny incremental movements on the globe until you get around to German, which is one spot on the map. And then you get around to American, which is one spot on the map. And then French is an interesting one, because then you get into the smack the butt, where there's a little restriction of the movement. Here we had full range of motion, full range of motion, full range of motion. And then when we try to cross over, we get to what a lot of drummers call French. And so if we want to still have a full range of motion, we have to be able to do this. We have to be able to let the stick come all the way back here. And that's how we get a full range of motion. That's how we get power in French. And if you want power in French, you'd better be in your somatomotor cortex. Because these two fingers, even science even knows exactly where in the brain that's controlling both the sensation and motor nerves for this movement. So the man coming to here, we're full range of motion. When we get around to French, we have to be able to come all the way back. This is very Keith Carlock, my favorite drummer. He's got sick French grip. He gets a lot of power because he really understands this sensitive piece here. And so if he goes into lizard brain, he loses this. It innervates the nerves go into the hand, and the human nerves can individuate the fingers, but if we go into reptile, it's just one signal. I know Dom talked about focal dystonia and trigger finger. What that is, it's an autonomic response that instead of individuating the nerves in the fingers, suddenly it just, everything clamps up. There's the focal dystonia cure by Dr. Ruth Childs. She worked with Victor Wooten, and he had focal dystonia problems, and she wasn't working on his hands, she was working on his autonomic nervous system, because he's regressing. There's some composite, some compounded in his body to the point that he started going into fight or flight, and you lose that fingertip sensitivity, and he has to stay in the neocortex in order to have the ridiculous virtuosic chops that guy has. And same thing with trigger finger. Like if you have the hand open, and humans can do that. Humans can do this. Reptiles would do that. So when the finger comes down, it's very common that it's an autonomic the vagus nerve response to threat for whatever reason. That's what those reasons are, get very, very deep. But just I like to keep this idea. If anyone's seen the Inception, the movie Inception, how there are these different levels of consciousness, of DreamWorks, I like to think about these different levels of human, reptile, human, mammal, reptile, and fish. And so you want to have the totem, the totem that he spins and it falls down if he's in reality and it keeps spinning if he's in certain other levels of consciousness. Well, this is a totem for me. If I have access to this, I know that I'm in my somatomotor cortex. And so having coordination between all four limbs is useful for that. So the globe technique, push-pull, is a great one. So a reptilian movement is this. We've all seen drummers who play this way, and it gets the job done. But this is more of a human access to the cortex. So if we go back and forth, that it gives us more fluidity because we want access to the reptile. We want the crouching tiger and the hidden dragon, because there's power in the reptile, but we don't want to get stuck there. So if we have different techniques that can have us go back and forth between these different conscious levels, we can fingers to reptile, and that becomes push-pull. So if I'm ever feeling on a gig like, oh man, where am I at? I need my totem. What's going, what state am I in? If I want to double check and make sure that I'm in my human brain. So I'll kind of go back and forth and check myself. And if I don't have access to that push-pull, I'm like, okay, I'm going to need to do some work and make sure that I haven't gone into lizard brain, which I'm going to get into somatic bank account, which when you go into lizard brain, you have to have fail-safes to get out of it. And so there's one other topic like this idea that the globe, like this is not reptilian. If you're able to move this way, this is another proof, another totem that you're in your somatomotor cortex, and there's your physiological state's controlled by your vagus nerve. So I'll show you another example of how movement kind of lets us know what state we're in. point of that, whether it was performed well or not, is that I know that I have access to this globe in my hands. And so if I notice like, wow, I'm starting to have to move my arm more than I anticipated, that means like, okay, that's a cue that I'm sort of falling into fight or flight. I'm falling into lizard brain, and it's vacuous. It's a spiraling thing, because the less access you have to your wrist, the more your arms start moving. And the more your arms start moving, I like to think of, what if a caveman was around the fire and suddenly he's moving like this, and then all of a sudden he's moving like this. It's like, whoa, what the heck is that? It's like, if you don't know the person's drumming, that looks like an offensive maneuver, or if they're being defensive. And so what happens in our sensory nerves, this much movement, it cues to our brain like, okay, arms are moving a whole hell of a lot. Something's going on here. Let's cue to threat. And so once you lose that finger control and wrist control and move to arms, that's going to cue your body to go more into threat, which you lose all of these things that make us human and make our drumming have nuance. So let's see, how are we doing at 45? Okay, let's say we got to the feet. All right, so I'm going to talk about the somatic bank account. So if we're finding ourselves falling out of our human brain and falling into this fight or flight response, or even all the way regressing down even lower, which is called the dorsal vagal response. It's like a shutdown response in the gut. And like that's procrastination happens there, like complete and utter shutdown, like just drooping happens there. And that's a response that happens after fight or flight. And so if either of those things are happening, if you're even away from the drums, if you're feeling this lethargy or alienation or procrastination, or you're feeling amped up and you don't know how to regulate, there's this model I like to use. It's called GRACE: grounding, relaxation, awareness, centering, and energizing. I talk about it in my TED Talk in case you're curious and want to remember it more, but I want to talk about it more in the context of drums sets. So, well, before I get into that, any kind of thoughts or questions about lizard brain and somatomotor cortex? No? Oh, okay. Cool. Let's get so grounding in the feet. This is sort of bottom-up approach, because we've noticed when we test stress hormones, when people are up on their toes, this is cueing people into fight or flight, literally flight. Like if you're up on your toes, you are prepared for action. And so these sensory nerves from your feet are shooting up your body and telling your brain, okay, we are in a defensive posture. We are ready to get the hell out of wherever we are, either because there's a threat or because we don't belong here, which cues to imposter syndrome. There's definitely there's a connection between imposter syndrome and our autonomic nervous system. When we're under threat, if there's not a visible threat, we start to believe, or at least our brain does, that we don't belong where we are. And so if you're ever feeling these things, these are all kind of cues to know that we need to shift our physiological state. And so heels on the ground is a great one. Now, there's a really cool interview with J.R. Robinson, and he talks about when he learned to put heel down, that shifted his time into this really comfortable place that he liked. He used to play heel up. I can't play that volume heel down, but he does. But what's interesting is his left foot is up then. So he has kind of this left heel, right foot down, left heel up. And for whatever reason, that works for him, obviously. But when both heels are down, that gives us this comfort level. This gives us our security on a bottom-up kind of viewpoint or perspective. The nervous system is thinking, okay, I am grounded. I am not going to face plant this organism that I'm in control of. So it reduces our level of our stress hormones being released. So the more we can have our heels down, the better. And so the same thing the way to practice this is the same thing that I did with push and pull. You can do this away from the drums, just like do four counts of heels down and then 4 counts of toes. Heel, 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 heel. Toe, toe, toe. I'm not cool enough to have a foot cam, sorry. 3, 4. Toe, 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 toe. Heel, 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 toe, toe. Cool. And then do 2 heel, 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 toe, toe. And just kind of rock back and forth. And then go ones. Heel, toe, heel, toe. And now switch it. Now go heel in the left and toe in the right. and notice how that shifts your balance. And so kind of plan accordingly, like adjust what you're doing with your feet so that you maintain balance. You're not putting pressure on your tailbone. And so now the same thing that we did with the rudiments, like that's the paradiddle, we can do paradiddles that way. Try first unison, heels to toes, like heel, toe, toe, and then mix that up. Go heel and toe opposite and play paradiddles. And that's going to really start organizing your understanding of balance. So does that make sense? So yeah, you're okay, cool. So it's
we have a couple of questions here that
okay.
Can I fire them at you?
Yeah, please.
Hannah would like to know, hi Hannah, how does being in the different brains affect the regulation of the vagus nerve?
Well, it's the vagus nerve is what's regulating the brain, because the vagus nerve is 80% sensory nerves. That's a great question, by the way. And I love that you asked that, because that's such, culturally, we always think of the brain initiating everything. But the science of the fMRI has been telling us that there's something called primacy of affect. And that means before most of our cognition is a 2-millisecond sensation. And so we think that the thought is first. We think the thought's first. But it's actually, there's so much evidence that most thoughts are preempted by a sensation. And it's so often from our vagus nerve, because the vagus nerve's 80% sensory nerves. The vagus nerve runs, there's branches of it through our eyes and through our mouth, and the laryngeal, pharyngeal, and they go to the ear, and they go to, and then this connects to the cranial nerves, and it goes down through our heart and lungs, and it goes below the diaphragm, all the kidneys, spleen. So like every major organ in our body is controlled by the vagus nerve, and 80% of that sensory information is going up. And so our brain is being bombarded by this emotional information from our viscera. And so your question is, how do we control that? We have to regulate the vagus nerve. And there are lots of ways to do it. In fact, like tapping is a good way, like unisons on our head, like we follow the vagus nerve in our face. This is a good regulation. There's another great one between songs. If you trace very gently your finger and you breathe in on the upstroke and down on the downstroke, you're having to be sensitive to your finger touch. You're also being sensitive to receiving the touch in the other hand, and you're also affecting the breath. And so this is a good regulation. You can kind of do it out of sight. And it's like, and if you're touching your hand softly enough, it kind of tickles. And then that really cues you to be into your neocortex as well. And so what the subtlety of the question is, how do you stay in the neocortex?
The one I just asked?
Yeah.
Well, it was how does being in the different brains affect the regulation of the vagus nerve?
Oh, okay. Yeah, the regulation is its own thing. So social engagement is one aspect of it. This is being present and being human and connective and essentially in your groove, feeling safe in your nervous system. Another one is fight or flight, and another one is shutdown. And those all have corollary cues that happen physiologically that would be way too hard to get into in 10 minutes. I see Michael Lear talking. Hannah, seriously, if you want to know more about this, Adam at adamgust.com. I would love to have a conversation with you. I want to open conversations about this because all of this physiology affects our drumming so much, and we think it's cognitive. There's all this sensory information coming up, and we apply judgment and words to it, and we apply judgment to ourselves based on it, when so often it's just a matter of regulating our physiology.
Really, I'm Adam, listen, don't worry. With our presenters in SEN, like everyone's so open-minded here. Like this is like, I'm just realizing there's this whole area that I don't know about. I mean, you're opening our eyes to some really great stuff. So we could see that this is like so big that you could never explain it in an hour. So
okay.
Let me fire these other questions at you. These are pretty cool.
Yeah.
Anthony, I'll come back to that question. Brian, say just your foot unison thing that you were saying, that up and down. Doing those unisons can induce a positive vagus response, is the question?
Yes, absolutely, yes. Yeah, there's empirical evidence that shows that being in balance, being grounded in our heels, reduces our stress. And another great practice is to do it standing. I know both Joe and Michael, I've heard you both say that sitting is the new smoking. And I love how that lands, because it's like you don't get better at sitting by sitting. You get better at sitting by doing something else that helps you to sit. And so another great practice for sitting is to actually stand and do these practices. And so if you're like I do it, I'm in the checkout, seems like I'm always in the wrong line at the grocery store, and I'm always stuck waiting, and so I'll actually do these exercises where I'll go back and forth with my feet, and I'll try to figure out, okay, how far should I lean back? How far should I lean forward? And I notice when I do that, I'm regulating my physiology. And then when I sit at the drums, I'm like, oh, I already have this kind of balance figured out. So when I'm doing technique on either pedal, I am figuring out, oh, I'm already being more regulated this way. There's another big cue for regulating the vagus nerve is just rocking back and forth, like equally back and equally forward. And so just like rocking this way back and forth, that's why kind of, mentally ill people do this, because they know that it feels better. And so, we're all mentally ill a little bit playing drums. So let's go ahead and regulate ourselves. And so I love to just like pulse my neck back and forth. I have this kinetic metronome, the Soundbrenner. And so I wrap it around my neck and I tie it and I set it and I cue it. We're running. Well, anyway, if you get this, it's really cool. You set the tempo and you pulse your neck back and feel the kinetic metronome on your neck, and it cues you. And after a while, you start feeling like you're the one making the Soundbrenner create the time. Then it's like when you get into that headspace, that's what I feel is internalizing tempo. When a feeling becomes a rhythm, like unison feels a certain way, and like time starts to feel a certain way. The back of the neck's really important because that's where all the sensory nerves come up the back of the spine, and that's the last conduit before it gets to the brain. So that's why when you're in the shower and the water hits you, like you really feel the temperature on the back, because that's where all your sensory nerves are. So, yeah. Oh, was there more questions?
Yeah. Anthony Cassina. Hey, Anthony. Always great to see you, and thanks for being such an active part with SCN. He's always involved here and great teacher and player. While studying with Gary Chester, he often talked about when you lead with your left hand, your brain's in a creative mode, and when leading with the right, it's more analytical. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, because oh man, I would love to talk about Ian McGilchrist's study of brain lateralization. So the right brain is more connected with feeling, and the left brain is more connected with analytical reduction, more kind of cognitive bias I talked about, trying to reduce, and feeling tries to expand. And so the two sides of the brain are constantly in this, not a tug of war, they're trying to complement each other. So the left brain is trying to reduce down to granular so that we can understand it, and the right brain is trying to expand so that we can kind of, the wonder and greatness of the great unknown. And so so there's this balance going on, and each hand is associated with that. And that's why these unisons are so important, because if you can feel this connectivity, then you're lateralizing your brain, and you have both this expansive, great unknown curiosity, and you can also reduce down to the granular and find out the detail-oriented parts of this. And this all relates so much to Kundalini Yoga and the 6 chakras. The 6 chakras represent the vagus nerve. And then if you can line these all up, then you have access to this harmony between left and right brain. And so these cultures that have been observing the nervous system for, so many years, they don't have the science to back up what the vagus nerve is, but they've felt it. And so that's why this science connects so much with, like, oh my God. So I love my bow staff because I've been really realizing there's a big part of like going back in history and finding reptilian, mammalian, human. And I've noticed like, okay, well, we have this idea of stick control. What was the earliest stick control? And it was like, wow, it's actually the bow staff. And it makes you feel like pretty protected when you had. So when I mess around with this, I notice I really learn a lot about my centering, and I started learning a lot about mobility. So there's this move with the bow staff that's like this. And so when I've learned, it's harder to do with a stick. But when I do this, I realize, okay, if you like kind of back the stick off and you let one side of it be more lopsided, you wind up with this infinity movement. And so what this is, like if without rebound, it looks like this, and with rebound, it looks like that. "20 minutes with a bow staff and I sit down the drums and it feels freaking amazing. I mean, you have this big heavy stick whipping around your face, and if you can maintain composure inside of that, you're regulating your vagus nerve. And so there was the globe idea. This is more linear. This is more straight up and down. But this infinity symbol with the stick, it's more moving around. You can still get a good sound out of the drum this way. And again, it's a great way to not have to move the arm so much and just move the wrist. I'm just trying to show how I don't need to have so much arm movement, because so much arm movement is dysregulating. So, okay, is there a quick way to get...
Yeah, I'm going to preempt that with my own question.
Oh, yeah.
I'm the host. No, we're going to get to that one, Celine. So since we're all drum teachers here, I think we all may have had the situation, and I have it on a weekly, often, sometimes even with an established student, when they come into the lesson, even though they're relaxed and this is a safe place and we're friends, there's a certain, I'm performing for the teacher. And some of them, I think, fight themselves and get into that, fight or flight. Now, is there a suggestion you might have for somebody like me who is not an expert like you in some of these, in some of the nerve science, something I can suggest to a student who I think is getting nervous and getting into a space in a lesson, to get them more into touch with this kind of state of being that you're describing?
Yeah, because that dives into this therapeutic relationship that I recommend that teachers have with students. You're not only teaching them how to be drummers, you're learning what their defaults are in stress. Some people up there, you'll notice facial cues. You'll notice the head lean forward. So that's why I feel like in terms of professional development for drum teachers, we need to understand what these physiological cues are. And because that was a great question. I wish we had more time for this. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and check out ACEs. There's an ACEs study that indicates that how students tend to fall into 3 camps. And if you understand that as a teacher and you can look for those cues, then you can kind of know, there might be shutdown or there might be, more fight or flight. And when they're in fight or flight, the first thing I would think is neck back. Because that's such a typical thing, is head forward. And once we have the head hanging forward, we're activating the muscles in our neck, we're off balance. It's this, like the grenade example, it's like we're in this protective posture. And it's cell phone posture. It's like anyone with a cell phone, we're automatically cueing ourselves into fight or flight this way. And so that's why I really like this pulsing the neck towards the back of the beat. I notice I'm taking Brazilian dance lessons, and all the movements are pulsing towards the back. And that's how we regulate and lean more on the back side of the beat. So, man, that question you just asked is easily an hour, but it's a
Adam, you know what's funny is that with the younger kids, and I'd like to see nods if you guys agree. With the younger kids, you might have to look for the cues, but the adults will just tell me. They'll be like, man, I was doing this at home and I'm so nervous in front of you because I want to do a good job. They're telling me they're in that state. And I'm trying to coach them to relax. We always say, well, it's okay, it's cool, just try to relax. But maybe doing those emotion like that could assist.
Yeah, that would help. Breath. Man, I wish we had more time. We could definitely talk about breath, because there's a certain type of breath that can make fight or flight worse, especially shoulders up and high in the chest versus more diaphragmatic breathing. And there's some great biochemical, there's ways to breathe really lightly so that the oxygen gets into your muscle tissues. The less you breathe, the more oxygen gets into your brain and your tissues. It's kind of counterintuitive. But when you start depleting these resources, you go into threat. Your body's like, oh my gosh, I'm losing oxygen, or I'm losing, nutrition, or I'm losing balance. And that's cueing you with a vagus nerve, okay, if I maintain this for this amount of time, I'm going to have to be in a serious defensive position. And that's when stress response starts happening. And it's all non-conscious for so many of us. And then our brain starts attaching judgment and words to it. And we think it's us, or we think it's our environment. But yeah, Joe, that's totally the question to be asking as a drum teacher.
You just, I think you might have sunk yourself into a part two, because we have several comments about getting a part two already. So
I would love that.
I preempted Celine's question. So before we end, I want to make sure I ask it. Is there a quick way to get back to the human brain while playing if dysregulation kicks in?
Yeah, is there a quick way? Well, that's what your practice is for. You really have to first figure out what your defaults are, because all of us have different ones. In this work, I know that I have 7 cues. And if I'm questioning myself, okay, I know that if my left foot comes up, if my left shoulder comes up, if my eyes, I just know what my defaults are. And so while you're practicing, you need to do these body checks, because on stage it's too late. I mean, I'm sorry, that's bad news, but it's the truth. That's what our practice is for. And so much of our practice routine cues us to threat, especially cognitive bias systems. And so when we get to that high pressure system and the compression's on and it starts bringing up all these nuanced things that we're not noticing in our practice, but we definitely notice it on stage. And so, yeah, I'm sorry I don't have a quick fix for, I mean, it'd be ideal to just have some hack, some drug you could take. But yeah, it's really about practicing in a way that prepares you for high performance, that increases your tolerance level to stress. And yeah, that would definitely be a part two. And in terms of posture and breath, those are kind of things that would be first thoughts, like make sure that you're trying to lean back, because leaning forward is such a killer for groove and rushing and strain. But yeah, breathing deep into your diaphragm is probably the best quick answer I could offer.
That's great. Well, I mean, there's a lot to digest here. I mean, certainly we can go a few more, a little while longer, but I think to get into more detail, we'll have to do a part two. Do you have some resources on your site that we can? I mean, I watched some of the YouTube videos and they were great. What do you have as far as I can post it and share to everybody?
Yeah, well, my TED Talk, I'm proud of it. I worked hard on it. It's kind of the trunk that I'm going to be branching out from the rest of my life. And there's also the Drum Mantra podcast. I talked with Rich Stitzel, and I could send you some links that more specifically deal with the somatics of drumming, sort of counteracting this cognition that we're also kind of bombarded with, and just like trying to overcompensate by really focusing on bottom up. I could offer some links. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate this opportunity to talk about this, and I'm just now finally at a point where I feel like I'm ready to be able to put it in language that drummers could understand, because I've been so surrounded by people way smarter than me for so long. Like, it's like, okay, now the science for me is figuring out how to bring it to my community, and for you to help me to figure out what's landing with you and what could land with students, because we're so in need of this work, I feel.
Well, I'm going to send you the chat, like I said, because you're going to see from these comments, we love this. This is really enlightening. And,
oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you.
You guys, when we got on, Adam was saying, like, I really want to talk to drummers, and I feel like, this is great. I mean, have you done PASIC?
No, I haven't, but I would love to. Yeah, the health and wellness part of PASIC, I'm very interested in.
Oh, I mean, you got to do it there. Maybe I know a guy, maybe I'll talk to a couple people about that. If I get it on the list. This is great. Well, we would certainly love to do a part two. As everybody knows, I do try to stay pretty disciplined with the hour sessions so we can stay on schedule. But man, thank you. This is brilliant. It's just fascinating and useful, and a lot to absorb for somebody who's never heard about this before.
Wow, thank you. I was trying to give some takeaways, because it's so easy to get lost in the theory of it, but it's really when you get into the practice of it and you start feeling better, that's when it lands. I remember like the first few things I did, like I'm trying to figure out how to loosen up and how to orchestrate breathing and posture, and especially unisons. There's a whole practice with using unisons and do like the 6 levels of coordination between the 4 limbs. When I would spend an hour on that and I'd go back to playing a regular beat, I would just be like, what the? It just felt so good. Your vagus nerve lets you know that it likes what you're doing. Yeah. And so it's really, when you have that feel, I'm sure like Michael Lear knows, like when you've done yoga long enough, you just start feeling it and you're like, okay, once you feel it, then you're hooked. So
it also seems to me like when you were talking about being in heel down position, like with my foot technique, I play heel up, but my home position is with my heel down. Like I don't stay in that pushing down or the molar movement, like all the techniques. I feel like all of the great techniques, whether it's Gladstone, whether it's Moeller, whether it's whoever, they're all in concert with what you're talking about. It's all trying to put yourself in a physiological state of well-being and relaxation to allow the movement to happen, to express what's inside. So it's like, it all works together. Like nothing's in competition. I feel like, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody who's observed the nervous system long enough, they know what the vagus nerve's doing, whether they know the science of it or not. But I feel like there's this emotional context that's missing. Like a lot of people have told me, Dave Elitch is talking about embodiment and, it sounds like what he's doing. I'm like, no, but there's this whole nother level of like what's happening physiologically that's so crucial. It's like, I remember I would be practicing like, okay, I'm going to keep my posture up, and I'd turn away for a second and I'd come back and I'd be like, what the hell's wrong with me? Like, why did I do that? And I would really blame myself. And then I realized, oh my God, I'm in the wrong physiological state. There's no amount of cognition that can overcome the wrong state we are in emotionally. And so when I started cueing to that and I wanted to keep better posture, oh, that's where it is. I was thinking here rather than here. So
yes, I get, this is great because, I'm constantly telling students good technique is reprogramming your habits.
Yeah. Yep. Habit versus intention. Oh man, that's a huge one. Yep.
All right. Yep. Well, this is great. We're going to have you back. Everyone's loved it. And you guys, thank you for your kind words for both of us, Adam.
Thank you. Man, thank you so much for sticking with me. This is really my first foray into this community of people. And thank you, Sabian, SEN, and thank you, Joe, for having me. And anyone who wants, Jeffrey Almonte, what's up? Yeah, anyone who wants to connect, please, please contact me, adamgust.com, adam@adamgust.com. And yeah, let's stay in touch, please.
Absolutely. I'll post everything in the site. And those of you who mentioned, yes, it has been recorded. I will post it. And no one left. So, you did good. No one left. So yeah, so we're good. So listen, you guys, thank you. Adam, thank you so much, man. I'm so impressed. And we'll have you back on. And the rest of everybody, great to see you. Thanks for being part of this. Thanks for your feedback. And, I'm getting the impression that the last few sessions have been well received. I have a nice one planned for next month with my old friend Ron Thaler, who's a great drummer, but also he sort of has this uncanny career of producing, drumming, and teaching, and he's an entrepreneur. And he's going to talk a little bit about diversification in his career. He taught about that at the Collective. So Ron's going to be on next month. You'll get some information about that in your inbox. And yeah, thanks again, Adam. You're wonderful. Really great.
Cheers. Thank you so much, all. Yeah, we'll definitely want to see you again. Cheers. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Michael. See you.